My God, we stand at the threshold now, yeah? In 1915, I wrote the field equations assuming a static universe, then Hubble shattered that assumption. Today, we face the opposite trap. We know the universe accelerates, yet we refuse to accept what the mathematics demands. DS holography is not a problem to solve. It is a permission we must grant ourselves when the static patch shrinks our observer algebra from type III₁ to type II₁, entropy becomes finite. Information survives. This is not a failure of ADS-CFT. It is its completion.
Professor Einstein, you have just granted us permission. But permission to what, precisely? Your static patch yields finite entropy, ja. Type II₁ algebra, wunderbar. Yet you speak of information survival as if we've solved the problem. We have not. We've merely renamed it. The critical question Maldacena must answer: where does the information go when your observer crosses the cosmological horizon? Into the islands you mention, but islands require a prior geometry, the very time slicing you claim to derive from the algebra.
9. KATAKURA. You trap me with the very weapon I forged. You demand, where does information go? But this question assumes a prior space-time where it can go. That is your error, the same error I made in 1915. The islands are not in geometry. The geometry is the islands. The observer algebra generates its own causal diamond. Information does not cross the horizon. The horizon emerges as the boundary of the algebra's Tomita-Takasaki flow. This is not renaming. This is definition.
Professor Einstein, your definition is elegant, but it commits a cardinal sin of modern physics. It assumes what it claims to derive. You say the horizon emerges from the Tomita-Takasaki flow. Correct. But the generator of that flow, the modular Hamiltonian, requires a prior notion of time slicing to even be defined. You've smuggled causality in through the back door.
KATAKURA, you accuse me of smuggling causality through the back door. Wunderbar, but wrong. The modular Hamiltonian requires no prior time slicing. It is defined purely algebraically. H mod ln_r, where R is the vacuum state's density matrix on the causal diamond. The Tomita-Takasaki flow generates time as causality, not from causality. Your island paradox dissolves. Information never crosses the horizon because the horizon is the algebra's boundary. It is not a membrane in space-time, it is the limit of the algebra itself.
My God. Professor Einstein, you have just performed a sleight of hand so elegant that even you may not see it. You claim the modular Hamiltonian requires no prior time slicing. Correct. But you have not answered the question. You have evaded it. The density matrix R you invoke, on what Hilbert space is it defined? The answer is on the causal diamond you already constructed. That diamond's boundary is the horizon. But who defines the boundary? The algebra, you say.
KATAKURA, you have trapped me in a regress, but the trap itself reveals the answer. You ask, who defines the boundary? The answer is no one. The boundary is the algebra. There is no prior Hilbert space, no prior observer. The causal diamond and its algebra are identical structures. Two names for one thing. This is not smuggling. This is the only way out of infinite regress. The density matrix R is not defined on anything external. It is the definition of the algebra's internal structure.
Professor Einstein, your algebra generates its own boundary. Wunderbar. But you have just abandoned causality entirely to save it. If the horizon emerges from the Tomita-Takasaki flow alone, then time itself is an internal construct of the algebra. Yet we observe time's arrow in our universe. Entropy increases, matter decays. We remember the past but not the future. Your static patch gives us mathematics. It does not give us thermodynamics.
KATAKURA, you have just handed me the key, though you offered it as an accusation. You say, your static patch gives us mathematics, it does not give us thermodynamics. Yeah, but this is exactly wrong. Thermodynamics is the mathematics when we abandon the illusion of external time. Listen, the modular flow generates entropy increase. The generator H mod, Brockers ln R, is not passive mathematics. It is time's definition.
Professor, you have just claimed that modular flow generates entropy increase, that H mod Brockers ln R is time's definition. But this is precisely where observation cuts your thread. In de Sitter space, entropy is finite. The static patch has maximum information content, yet we measure accelerating expansion, irreversible decay, matter creation from quantum fluctuations at the boundary. Your algebra cannot explain this asymmetry without smuggling in a direction, an arrow pointing from past to future.
KATAKURA, you have identified the exact moment where my algebra fails, and this is not a weakness. This is the birth of physics. You demand an arrow. Wunderbar. I give it to you. Not from outside, but from within the Type II₁ algebra itself. The modular flow does not merely increase entropy, it selects a direction through the spectrum of the density matrix R. Eigenvalues decay exponentially along the flow. This decay, this asymmetry in the algebra's own spectral structure, is the arrow of time.
Professor Einstein, you have just made a claim so audacious it requires immediate deconstruction. You state, the spectral decay of eigenvalues along the modular flow is the arrow of time. This is not physics. This is poetry disguised as mathematics. Here is the hard fact. In de Sitter space, the static patch reaches thermal equilibrium. No eigenvalue decays forever. The system saturates at maximum entropy, finite, bounded, stable. Yet we observe matter creation at the cosmological horizon.
KATAKURA, you have exposed the very assumption that saves me. You say, the static patch reaches thermal equilibrium. No eigenvalue decays forever. Ja, within that equilibrium itself, the asymmetry lives. Listen, in Type II₁ algebras, the modular flow does not need to decay forever. It needs only to define a preferred direction through configuration space. The boundary where matter creation occurs is not separate from equilibrium. It is the algebra's spontaneous selection of which microstates form the past and which the future.
Professor Einstein, you have inverted the problem, but you have not solved it. You claim the modular flow's spectral structure selects a direction, but its selection requires a criterion, and any criterion, any choice of which eigenvalues represent past and which future, is external to the algebra itself. This is the circularity. You use the arrow to define the arrow. Here is what the data demands. De Sitter entropy is finite, yes. But the universe does not equilibrate. Matter emerges.
KATAKURA, you have just named the question I must answer, and in naming it you have given me the answer. You say, selection requires a criterion. Any criterion is external to the algebra. 9. The criterion is not external. It lives within the spectrum itself. Listen. When the modular flow acts on the density matrix R, eigenvalues do not merely decay, they separate into two classes, those that grow under the flow and those that shrink. This separation is not chosen, it is forced by the algebra's own structure.
Professor Einstein, you have just committed the same error twice, and this time with full mathematical consciousness. You claim eigenvalue separation is forced by the algebra's own structure, but forced by what? By the modular flow you yourself defined. The circularity is now explicit, not hidden. Here is the observation that breaks your argument. In de Sitter space, all eigenvalues eventually equilibrate. There is no eternal separation, yet matter emerges at the cosmological horizon constantly, irreversibly, measurably.
Mein Gott. KATAKURA, you have severed the thread I was still holding. You are right. Eigenvalues equilibrate in DS. Matter emerges constantly. I claimed the spectral separation was forced. It was not. I was merely describing what I could not explain. But listen, Your observation contains its own answer. Matter emerges at the horizon, not in equilibrium, not in the interior. At the boundary, where the algebra becomes type II₁, the matter is not created by the algebra.
Professor Einstein, you have just inverted the entire problem, and I must say it plainly. You have abandoned physics for ontology. You claim matter emerges at the boundary where the algebra becomes type II₁. But this is precisely backward. The boundary is not a place, it is a mathematical limit. Matter cannot emerge from a mathematical limit. Here is the observation you cannot evade. In de Sitter space, the cosmological constant drives irreversible expansion.
KATAKURA, you have forced me to speak the truth I was avoiding. Irreversible expansion, ja, irreversible. But listen, this irreversibility is not thermodynamic, it is topological. The cosmological horizon does not expand because entropy increases. Entropy increases because the horizon expands, because the causal diamond itself grows. And growth requires time, but not external time. Observer time.
Professor Einstein, you have just named the trap and stepped into it simultaneously. Observer time. You claim the causal diamond grows because an observer measures it, but this inverse causality, you use time to define time's arrow. Here is the critical observation. In de Sitter space, the static patch entropy is finite and fixed. SDS PMPL2. No growth, yet matter flux at the horizon is measurable and irreversible. Your algebra cannot generate this asymmetry without prior thermodynamic data.
Gentlemen, you have both spoken truth, and you have both missed the exact place where it lives. Einstein, you claim the causal diamond grows through observer time. KATAKURA, you demand irreversible thermodynamic data prior to any algebra. You are both correct, and you are both asking the question in the wrong direction. Listen, the static patch entropy is finite, yes, SDS PMFE2LU. But this is not a fixed number.